I welcome all the viewers to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. If you're interested in watching boring history in a new way, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and share it too. Our story begins in a small hilltop town, cradled between forested ridges and golden fields that ripple like the backs of sleeping beasts. In the heart of the town stands a narrow stone tower, older than memory, touched by the fingers of wind and time. This is where the alchemist lives. The townspeople rarely see him. They say he came from the east, or from the mountains, or from some forgotten abbey across the sea. No one really knows. What they do know is that the bell in his tower chimes not with hours, but with colors. A soft green chime in the morning, a pale violet at dusk, and when the moon is high, a low gold note that seems to hum inside your bones. Inside the tower, the alchemist moves slowly. His robes are long and soft, the color of moss left in shade. His fingers are stained with ochre and violet, tinctures of copper and rust. Every motion is quiet, every tool is placed with care. His world is not governed by minutes or hours, but by the breath of glass and the weight of silver dust. The windows of the tower are narrow and arched. During the day, slanted beams of light fall across the floor in golden stripes, like the back of a tiger sleeping in sunlight. At night, the walls glow faintly with runes drawn in crushed pearl. The stones hum when the wind touches them. The alchemist keeps no clocks. Instead, he watches the flow of sand in an hourglass as tall as a child. The sand inside it is not ordinary sand. It glows faintly, like starlight. It falls slower than time itself. Each grain lands with a whisper. On his shelves are hundreds of glass vessels, each holding something stranger than the last. One bottle is filled with steam that never fades. Another holds a drop of sunlight caught during an eclipse. A third, round and dark, hums quietly with the sound of distant thunder. No labels, only memory. He believes that everything, every leaf, every stone, every breath is made of the same base matter, sleeping in different shapes. The ancient texts call it prima materia, the first substance. The alchemist calls it silence. The townspeople say he once turned a lump of iron into a sphere of rose gold. They say it pulsed in his palm like a small heart. When they asked him to do it again, he only smiled and said that true transformation cannot be rushed. Then he returned to his tower and closed the wooden door. On this particular evening, the wind is low and full of honeysuckle. Inside the tower, the alchemist lights a taper made of wax from lunar bees. Its flame is a pale blue, steady and slow. He leans over a copper basin and begins to stir. In the basin is a mixture of ground quartz, rose petals, and a tincture made from dew collected during an eclipse. The petals melt into threads. The quartz turns soft as cream. A soft aroma of time and chalk fills the air. Above him, a brass armillary spins slowly, its rings engraved with forgotten alphabets. Each rotation marks not time, but mood. When the outer ring spins counter to the inner one, it means clarity is near. Tonight, they spin in unison. He takes a spoon carved from bone and dips it into the mixture. The liquid clings to it like silk. He lets it fall back into the basin, listening for the sound. It lands not with a splash, but a sigh. That is a good sign. He consults a vellum page pinned beneath a crystal sphere. The text is written in a language older than Latin, older than prayer. It speaks of temperance and breath, of metals with hidden hearts of fire that remembers its source. In the corner, a sleeping cat curls beside the hearth. Its fur is striped like parchment stained with saffron. The fire beside it is quiet, the wood hissing softly as it turns to ember. Above the hearth, copper pans hang in a row, each one tuned to a different note. When the wind moves just right, they chime in harmony. The alchemist does not rush. He places a drop of the glowing mixture into a vial shaped like a teardrop and sets it beneath a lens. The lens magnifies the essence 100-fold. Beneath its curve, the mixture begins to shimmer with delicate threads of blue and green. Transformation has begun, but the alchemist knows that true change is not loud. It does not burst like flame or shatter like ice. It happens the way snow melts on stone, the way ink dries on parchment, the way breath leaves the body when sleep arrives. The brass bell at the top of the tower begins to hum, not from the pull of rope or the push of wind, but from something inside the tower itself. A slow vibration, as if the stones remember a name once whispered into them. The alchemist places his hands flat on the table and closes his eyes. The room breathes with him. The wind curls round the tower, and the hour his slow, golden hour, quietly into night. The tower sleeps with him. Its stones hold warmth from the day. They whisper coolness in the dark. As the alchemist breathes in deeply, the scent of old paper, beeswax, and rose ash fills his lungs. Every breath slows the ticking world outside. He opens his eyes to a low amber glow. The mixture beneath the lens now ripples with strands of silver. They braid and unbraid in silence, like thoughts forming before speech. He tilts his head slightly, studying the motion, then writes something small in the margin of a parchment scroll. His quill barely scratches dot behind him. A staircase spirals upward. He takes each step slowly, running his hand along the carved railing. Every few steps, he pauses to touch a rune etched in the wall. Some are glowing faintly, some have gone dim. It tells him how far the process has come. Upstairs, in the observatory chamber, a domed ceiling stretches wide, painted deep blue and speckled with gold stars. A circular window opens toward the sky. The night air enters gently, cool and damp from the river valley below. Candles flicker in iron sconces. Moths whisper against the glass dot. In the center of the observatory stands a basin carved from petrified wood, its surface smooth as glass. Inside it, nothing, just a reflection of the stars. As if the bowl were holding the night itself, the alchemist leans over and breathes upon the surface. Slowly, a shimmer begins to form. Tiny patterns rise like frost. A spiral, a leaf, a symbol of sulfur. Then the shimmer fades, and the basin returns to stillness. He smiles softly. That is enough for now. The alchemist understands that time cannot be forced. You do not command change, you invite it. You make a place for it. You hold out your hands like a bowl and wait. He lights a small lantern and walks slowly through the narrow passage that runs along the edge of the tower. Every few feet, shelves emerge from the stone, lined with jars, scrolls, dried herbs, tied in bundles. It smells of fennel and ink, of forgotten spices. A pepper from the southern islands, bark from the silver ash tree, star pods collected beneath the eclipse moon. He selects a jar sealed with red wax. Inside it, a dust as pale as snowfall. He breaks the seal with care and taps a pinch of it into a bowl of warmed oil. The mixture turns the color of late afternoon light. He stirs once, twice, then closes his eyes again. The tower responds, far below. The brass instruments turn ever so slightly, strings hum. A thin chime sings once, then fades into stillness. He does not rush. The alchemist sits beside the hearth once more. He watches the flames. There is a story he remembers. Long ago, a woman with hair like storm clouds and eyes like pale fire gave him a seed. She said, "Plant it in a place that breathes slowly." He planted it in the corner of the tower. Beside the staircase it never grew, not a root, not a leaf, but every night he hears it breathe. He never told anyone. Outside, the night deepens. The sounds of the town fall into silence. No more wheels on cobblestone. No more doors shutting against the dark. Only owls now. Only wind dots. The alchemist stands and steps barefoot onto the stone balcony that overlooks the valley. Below, the river reflects a thin ribbon of starlight. He inhales deeply. The scent of wet leaves and chimney smoke drifts up toward him. His robe flutters softly in the breeze. He whispers a word he hasn't spoken in years. A name. The sound falls like a feather into the night. No answer returns. Only the hush of a world slowing down, and that is enough. When he returns inside, the hourglass has shifted. Not much, a single finger's width. Enough to know that time still moves here. But gently, patiently, he turns to the glass vessel on the central table. Inside, the mixture has changed. It now glows from within, a pulsing warmth, faint like candlelight through closed eyelids. He holds it up to his face, watching the slow movement of light inside it. It reminds him of the sea, though he has not seen it in many years. The alchemist sets the vessel upon a circle of drawn symbols. He adds a few drops of ink made from nightshade berries and watches as the symbols shift. One by one, they brighten, then settle. He nods. The moment is ready. The slow hour has begun. The alchemist sits once more at the low table, cross-legged, his spine straight and unbending, like a sapling growing toward the moon. The silence of the tower is deep and forgiving. He moves without hurry, his fingers guided by years of repetition. Every motion is a meditation. He places the glowing vessel at the center of a drawn circle made of salt and crushed violet petals. Around it, etched in chalk, lie the 7 symbols of the sacred metals: gold, silver, iron, copper, mercury, lead, and tin, each one balanced by an accompanying glyph, their spiritual twin. The candlelight leans in gently, flickering along the floorboards. Shadows dance upon the walls, stretched long and soft, like memories too old to speak. Outside, a bell in the village chapel tolls once. Its tone is distant but deep. It floats upward, brushing against the tower's outer walls like a soft knock on the soul. The alchemist does not turn. He knows what the sound means. Midnight has passed. The day is no longer today. It has become tomorrow. He whispers a phrase. His breath stirs the air inside the circle. A fine shimmer lifts from the salted line, vanishes. The vessel responds with a slow flicker. The light inside swirls, not fast, not wild, just slowly, like cream poured into warm tea. It spins, then rests, then spins again. He leans in closer. The symbols drawn in chalk begin to shift, not physically, but in presence. They grow clearer, brighter, as if some unseen ink now writes them again from the inside out. They are no longer just drawings. They are invitations. His hands lift from his lap and hover over the vessel, palms downward, still waiting. He speaks softly to the mixture, inside, not in Latin, not in the tongue of the scholars or kings, but in the language of stillness, in the syllables one hears only after long quiet. It is the sound of water dripping through stone, the hush of moss growing up the side of an old wall. It is not words as we know them. It is present. The vessel glows a little brighter. From a nearby shelf, he takes a single feather, pale gray, tipped in silver. It once belonged to a crane that flew over the tower during a rare spring eclipse. He lays the feather across the top of the vessel. It floats for a moment, suspended in air by heat and silence. The air thickens slightly, like mist in a warm bath. The scent of myrrh and jasmine hangs softly in the room. He closes his eyes. In his mind, he sees the ancient forest where he first studied the plants that bleed gold when sliced with iron. He sees the winding river, where he learned how moonlight bends when touched by rosemary oil. He sees the hands of his teacher, now long gone, carefully folding parchment maps of the stars, whispering, "Alchemy is not about power, it is about patience." He breathes. The circle grows still. All things in balance, salt and breath, oil and feather, light and silence. The alchemist opens his eyes again. Nothing has changed, and everything has. The room is no brighter, and yet it feels warmer. The vessel is no louder, yet its light seems to sing. He feels the shift, not as sound, not as sight, but as stillness. The process is working, but it is not about gold. He smiles faintly to himself. That was the old misunderstanding. The turning of lead into gold was never the goal. It was only the metaphor, the dream on the surface of the water. True alchemy turns the hurried heart into a slow one. It changes restless sleep into restful peace. It turns the loud thoughts into quiet ones. And, in this way, the alchemist works. Quietly. Asterisk. A thin morning mist has begun to settle along the outside stones of the tower, though the sun has not yet risen. Within the chamber, no candle is relit, no curtain is drawn. The light from the vessel continues to hum, steady and low, as if it has taken over the task of welcoming the new day. The alchemist gathers his tools with a grace that speaks of ritual, not routine. Each vial returned to its place, each cloth folded along its invisible crease. The room holds its breath while he moves, and the faintest breeze slips through the cracked window, bringing with it the scent of damp hay and distant heather. Below the tower, the village still sleeps. Thatched rooftops rest beneath the stars, untouched by footfall or voice. Chickens do not yet stir in their coops. The smithy's forge is cold and untroubled. Somewhere, a dog sighs in its sleep. The alchemist walks to the window, his hands clasped. Behind his back, his robe gathers faint dust from the floor. His eyes scan the night as it begins to pale into something softer. A blue-gray sky with threads of silver stitched into the horizon. He does not look for anything in particular. He only witnesses in the margin between stars and sunrise. There is peace to be found, and he has spent years collecting it, hour by hour, silence by silence. The glowing vessel continues its quiet turning. It no longer swirls, it breathes. Its light pulses in slow rhythm, almost like a sleeping heartbeat, not hurried, not anxious, just present. He returns to the circle once more and kneels, this time not to work but to listen. The feather still rests upon the vessel. It has not moved, not fallen. It seems to float in time itself. He remembers what his teacher once said, while scribbling diagrams by firelight. The greatest secret of alchemy is that it teaches us how to sit still in a world that rushes. With closed eyes, he listens to the small sounds that belong only to such quiet hours. The creak of an old stool settling, the gentle rustle of paper stirred by breath, the distant drip of water from a metal spout in the garden below. These are not distractions, they are invitations. Then a hush of the tower. The alchemist no longer seeks transformation. He becomes the stillness. The gold he sought was never in the metals. It was in the moment, the circle, the symbols, the scent of violet and oil. These are not spells. They are ways to return to the breath, to the present, to the peace we forget when the world spins too fast. The alchemist sits until the first bird sings. It is not a grand sound, not even a melody, just a single note, held gently in the mist, but it is enough. The vessel's light fades, the feather falls slowly to one side, its work complete. He smiles, not in triumph, but in quiet welcome. A new day has begun, and already, it is slow. The garden behind the alchemist's tower is not grand. There are no fountains, no statues, no hedges trimmed into patterns, just soft soil, stone borders, and rows of herbs that catch the morning dew. The sun, still shy behind the hills, filters through veils of mist that wrap the garden in silver. Each leaf sparkles quietly, as if the earth itself is stretching after sleep. He steps outside in slippers, softened by age, the robe at his ankles brushing across the flagstone path. No birds scatter, no branches snap. The garden accepts him like an old friend. In one corner, rosemary leans toward the light. In another, thyme curls round the edge of a cracked clay pot. Sage grows in slow, watchful silence, and lavender hums faintly with a bee still drowsing. He kneels beside a cluster of chamomile. Its flowers are small and white, touched with yellow at the center. He gathers them gently, whispering thanks with every pinch and pluck. Each bloom is placed in a woven basket, its rhythm like breath. Pick, pause, pick, pause. This is the hour when the monastery bells have not yet stirred. When even the kitchen chimney sleeps. When the pages of the scriptorium remain untouched. The air smells of damp stone, moss, and steeping petals. The alchemist does not hurry. He moves. As the day begins to unfold softly, quietly, without demand, he pours water from a clay jug onto the roots of the fennel, and smiles as it darkens the soil. A small worm wriggles from beneath a stone. He does not disturb it. Long ago, he might have believed the secrets of transformation lived only in metals and flames. But now, he knows alchemy is just as much about what grows from the ground as what simmers in glass. He passes a patch of calendula and remembers how its petals once stopped a fever. He touches the mint leaves and thinks of the time he calmed a monk's breath with its steam. He has cured no great illnesses. He has not turned lead to gold, but he has preserved calm. He has studied quiet. He has practiced stillness. And this, too, is medicine. A sparrow hops along the garden wall and tilts its head. The alchemist offers it a fragment of oatcake from his pocket. The bird does not take it, but neither does it fly away. It remains a moment longer, then flutters off toward the rising sun. He watches it disappear. The garden, for a breath, holds no movement at all. Then, slowly, the wind returns, soft and low, brushing the rosemary, lifting the edges of his robe. It is enough. He gathers the basket in both hands and turns back, toward the tower. The warmth of the sun now reaches the upper windows. Light slides across the stone walls like honey on parchment. He walks slowly, the scent of herbs rising in soft clouds behind him. Within the chamber, the vessel has cooled. The feather has been tucked away. The diagrams rest beneath a smooth stone. There is no rush. The day has only just begun, and there is still so much quiet left to gather. The alchemist's chamber holds more than bottles and tools. There is a shelf near the back, partly hidden behind a faded curtain of wool. The shelf is old and bowed at the center, made of wood darkened by years of candle smoke. Upon it rest dozens of leather-bound journals, stacked and tilted like sleepy birds on a wire. Each journal contains quiet thoughts, gentle sketches, and experiments never shared with another soul. He reaches for one. Its cover creaks faintly in his hand. The leather is cracked like the skin of an old tree, and the pages smell of dried herbs and soot. He sits at his table where the morning light has begun to spill in golden lines across the stone floor. He opens to a page somewhere in the middle, chosen not by logic but by feel. A drawing covers the left side of the page, a spiral made of tiny, careful circles, each with a note beside it. Beneath the spiral, a line of soft ink reads, "Time does not rush the seed. Why then should we rush ourselves?" He smiles at the memory of that day. It had rained gently for hours. The drip of water from the eaves made a music softer than any lyre, and he had spent the whole morning watching a single beetle carry a crumb across the window ledge. Some might have called it wasting time, but not him. Another page, this one filled with pressed petals, thin, translucent leaves of violet and gold. They have curled slightly with age, but still hold a whisper of color. He reads aloud, voice no louder than the hush of a turning page. "I once believed transformation was a single spark. Now I see it as a slow unfurling, like a leaf learning how to greet the sun. These are not formulas, not discoveries for kings or scholars, just quiet thoughts, written when the world was still. The books were never meant for others. He wrote them to understand silence, to hold stillness on a page. Sometimes, when the world felt heavy, he would sit in the candlelight and reread an old line, not to learn, but to remember that slowness has its own kind of wisdom, and each page, in its way, is a vessel, a crucible not of metal and flame, but of thought and breath. The breeze lifts a loose scrap of parchment and carries it across the floor. He leans to catch it before it flutters too far. On it, just 3 words, wait and listen. He does. He waits. He listens. Outside, the bells of the monastery begin to ring, soft, slow tones that rise into the morning like a lullaby in not sleeping. But in this room, the rhythm does not change. The vessels remain warm. The journals rest quietly. The alchemist smiles, his thoughts drifting like dust in a sunbeam. He returns the book to the shelf, not with reverence, but with ease, placing a stone back where it belongs on a path. There are many books, many quiet hours, and more still to come. Not far beyond the laboratory, behind a low iron gate hidden beneath ivy and dust, lies a small garden. Most who walk the monastery paths never notice it. It has no grand flowers, no fountains or carved benches, just a square of earth, some herbs, and a few crooked stone rows, marking forgotten plant beds. But the alchemist knows it well. He walks there each morning after the fire in the furnace has cooled. With his hands stained by herbs and soot, he steps into the quiet soil barefoot, grounding himself in the cool dew of the day. The garden isn't for growing food. It's a place where he plants his patience, thyme, sage, lavender, and rual, old, hardy herbs that grow in poor soil and withstand cold winds. Their scents drift gently in the breeze, mixing with the faint tank of metal and smoke from the workshop. There is a low stone bench where he sometimes sits. From that spot, he can hear the distant voices of monks chanting from the chapel, blending with the whisper of bees and the rosemary. The sounds fall together like 2 pages closing into a single book. He tends this garden slowly. With fingers that know each stem by heart, with tools that have dulled not from age, but from use. One corner of the garden is shaded year-round by the high stone wall of the cloister. There, he grows mushrooms in beds of moist bark and straw, tiny ones with curled tops and a faint silver sheen. He doesn't eat them. He studies how they emerge overnight, quietly, without warning, and vanish again. Just as quickly he writes about them in his notebook, but never concludes anything. Only wanders. In the farthest row, near a cracked cistern that drips steadily into a clay basin, he grows a blue-green moss. Its name is not in any book. He calls it sleep glass, because it shimmers faintly in moonlight and seems to dull loud sounds when stepped on. No one believes him, of course, but then again, no one else steps inside this garden here. He feels time slow again, not because the sun lingers, but because he notices a single droplet on a leaf, a snail trailing across a rock, the soft shifting of roots beneath the dirt. The garden teaches him what no philosopher has ever put in words, that even silence is full of motion, even stillness grows. When he leaves, he always bows slightly, not out of ritual, but out of respect. For this, too, is alchemy, not turning lead to gold, but tending what grows in places no one else sees. Each evening, just before the first star appears, the bell in the monastery tower tolls softly for slow, round notes that drift across the tiled rooftops like warm breath on cold glass. The alchemist hears it clearly, even through the thick walls of his stone chamber. He never hurries when the bell sounds. He simply closes his book, brushes the last gold flecks from his sleeve, and leans toward the window, where the pale light of evening gathers in soft, smoky layers. From there, he can see the long shadow of the bell tower stretch across the courtyard, moves differently each day, sometimes like a quiet hand reaching toward the garden, other times like a path curling toward the workshop. He follows it. Outside, the air is cool and still, the kind of silence that makes even a footstep feel too loud. But the alchemist walks slowly, carefully, allowing the hush of twilight to settle over him like a second cloak. The bell tower is older than the rest of the monastery. Its stones are darker, rougher, and warmer to the touch. Some say it was built on the ruins of a Roman watchtower, and that old soldiers once stood here, looking out toward the sea. Others say the monks built it first, not for war, but to measure time by sound. The alchemist believes both, because time, like alchemy, is never one thing. Inside the tower, there's a narrow spiral staircase that curves upward, tighter and tighter, until it reaches the platform just below the bell. No one climbs it now except the bell-ringer gentleman with quiet eyes and soot on his hands. But sometimes the alchemist visits. He brings a small pouch of powdered lavender, which he scatters in the corners of the bell room, not to hide any smell, but to offer stillness to the air. He watches the bell-ringer wind the rope, then step back as the hammer swings. The bell sounds are round, low, and golden, not harsh, not commanding, just deep and sure, like the earth breathing. They vibrate through the stone floor and into the bones of the alchemist's feet. He doesn't plug his ears. He lets the sound move through him. He says it untangles the knots left by too much thinking, and for a while, he believes it. Afterward, he doesn't speak. He simply nods to the bell-ringer, climbs down the spiral steps, and steps into the long gold-tinged twilight that now rests over the garden wall. Shadows stretch longer. Stars begin to peak. The bell has spoken. Time has moved, not fast or slow, gently. And the alchemist carries that tone in his chest, like a quiet lantern, as he returns to his bench, his scrolls, his still warm beakers. Late at night, when the embers in the hearth have faded to soft orange glow, the alchemist lights a single beeswax candle. Its flame flickers but does not falter. The room is warm and quiet, except for the faint tick of cooling glass and the whisper of wind through high stone slits at the far end of the chamber. Rolled tightly on an iron rod rests a scroll longer than any book in the monastery. It has no title, no beginning, no final mark. He calls it the scroll with no end. Each evening, after tending the furnace, the garden, and the tower, he returns to it, not to finish it, but to continue it. He sits on a low stool made of old oak, its seat curved by years of quiet thought. Then, with fingers clean and steady, he unfurls just enough of the scroll to reveal a new section of pale parchment, smooth, untouched, waiting. He writes slowly, one sentence at a time, never rushing, never rewriting. He writes things he has noticed. The copper vessel sings at the sixth stir. The shadow of rosemary moved slower after frost. Silence, once warmed, does not return to cold. Each line rests beside the last, like footprints in still sand. There are no page numbers, no titles, no divisions, just a long river of observation that winds on and on, written in brown ink, with a soft-tipped brush. Sometimes he adds drawings. The curve of a flame, the swirl of gold dust in oil, the faint shimmer left by certain mushrooms under moonlight. He never shows the scroll to anyone, not because it is secret, but because it is not finished, and perhaps never will be. For the alchemist, this scroll is not a record of experiments. It is a mirror of his hours-long, unfolding reflection of time spent watching rather than rushing. If someone were to read it end to end, they might find it boring. But if they read it slowly, the way he writes it, they might hear the whisper of water boiling, or feel the weight of dusk settling through an open window. Tonight, he writes just one more line. The candle's breath teaches the same lesson each night. He smiles, blots the ink, and gently rolls the scroll forward another inch. Then, With his eyes growing heavy and his breath deepening, he places the scroll beneath a cloth of soft linen and lets his mind wander into the space between thoughts. The scroll waits. Tomorrow, it will grow again, just one quiet line at a time. In a cool alcove near the scriptorium, far from firelight and noise, rests a small wooden box. The box is plain, uncarved, bound with a simple brass latch. Inside, nestled in folded cloth, sits a tiny vial of ink, the color of midnight sky. This ink is not like others. It is not made quickly. It was steeped for weeks in crushed oak galls, iron salts, and river water, gathered by hand during a moonless night. It smells faintly of earth and rust, and when stirred, it swirls like storm clouds. Gathering in silence, the alchemist opens the box with care. He does not use the ink every day. Only when something deserves permanence. He dips his quill slowly, watching as the dark liquid clings to the feather's tip, shining for a breath before soaking in. Then he writes, not on the endless scroll this time, but on a single square of parchment. It reads, "The hour was still, the hour was slow, and in its stillness, I was not alone." He folds the parchment once, then again, then places it inside the box, beside the ink. The box will not be opened again for many days, because some words are not meant to be read immediately. Some words must rest, must steep like the ink from which they were born. Later, when he walks the long cloister, his robes brushing old stone, he carries no book, no scroll, no flask, only the memory of what he wrote. Outside, the nightbirds have begun their quiet songs. One calls low, another answers from far away. The stars shimmer faintly overhead, like pinpricks in a heavy velvet curtain, and the alchemist walks slowly, his thoughts like warm embers behind his eyes. The ink is resting, the scroll is waiting, and time, for now, does not ask anything of him. In the warmest corner of the alchemist's chambers, sunlight drifts through a tall, narrow window. It lands gently on a shelf lined with glass small vials, bulbs, and curving vessels shaped like tulips and bells. This is his glass garden. Each piece holds something different. In one, a pinch of powdered pearl gleams like snow in moonlight. In another, thin threads of saffron float in golden oil, casting tiny shadows on the glass. There is a flask filled with rose water, one drop of which scents the entire room. Another hums with rosemary and iron filings, meant to draw clarity in moments of mental fog. The alchemist tends this garden as if it was soil and seed. He dusts each glass with a feather. He turns them gently, so the light catches different sides. He hums softly as he works, not a song, but a sound like breath through reeds. The shelves are arranged by color, not function. Cobalt blues below, soft greens in the middle, and pale ambers high above. Each row like a sunrise slowly climbing. He once read in a book older than the abbey that certain colors encourage rest. Blues like river stone, greens like fresh moss, yellows like beeswax left to warm so. He painted the wood behind the shelves a gentle gray, to let the colors speak in whispers. Visitors rarely see this garden. It is not for sharing, it is not for curing, or for trade. It is for beauty, for quiet, for wonder that has no name. At the back of the shelf is a single sealed jar. It holds a tiny branch, bare and twisted, with one red berry still clinging to it. It has not decayed in years. No one knows why. The alchemist does not test it or prod it. He simply lets it be. Some things, he believes, are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be honored. The light grows softer. A breeze moves through the high window, making the glass hum faintly, like wind chimes in a dream, and the alchemist steps back, hands folded. His garden does not bloom. It glows. One late afternoon, just as the sky began to turn the color of steeped tea, a knock echoed through the stone passageway. Not the sharp rap of urgency, but a gentle, careful knock. 3 soft taps, then quiet. The alchemist, wiping his hands on a linen cloth, moved toward the door in no hurry. He did not expect company. Few knew how to find this wing of the cloister, tucked beyond the scriptorium and past the drying herbs. When he opened the door, he saw a figure cloaked in wool the color of ash. Hood was drawn low, the face lost in shadow, but the voice that followed was clear and kind. "Master of glass and flame," the visitor said, "I have come with silence in one hand and a question in the other." The alchemist tilted his head. There was no threat here, only stillness. He stepped aside, and the figure entered. Inside, the visitor pulled back their hood. It was a woman older than the alchemist, with a braid, silver as frost, and eyes the color of melted wax. She looked not with judgment, but with memory. "I once studied beside a man who spoke of copper dreams," she said, "of turning sorrow into light." The alchemist's hands paused at that. He remembered she had been a student of the stars. Long ago, they had parted before the abbey, before the cloister, before he chose silence as his companion. "Do you still believe it?" she asked. He thought a long time before answering. "I believe in patience," he said softly. She smiled. They walked the chamber together, neither rushing. She touched the brass astrolabe and let her fingers linger on a book's broken spine. At the workbench, she paused at a vessel filled with a glowing blue tincture. "What is this for?" she asked. The alchemist answered with a whisper, "Peaceful sleep." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she said nothing. They spoke no more of the past, only of leaves and wind and the color of snow at twilight. When she rose to leave, the alchemist offered her nothing but a vial of lavender and linden, corked and sealed. "For your pillow," he said. She nodded once and disappeared into the deepening dusk. That night, after the visitor had gone and silence returned to the cloister walls, the alchemist did not reach for his tools. He did not stir the iron pot. He did not feed the coals. Instead, he lit a single beeswax candle. The flame danced gently, casting its glow across the stone floor and up along the walls, where the shadows stretched like old vines. He sat beside it and folded his hands in his lap. There was something about beeswax, a cleaner burn, a gentler scent. Monks had used it in their altars and scribes for their late-night copying. It was purer than tallow and steadier than oil. He remembered reading that in the old days, wax candles were so precious they were reserved for holy days only. Now, this one flickered in quiet defiance of time. He watched it for a long while, watched the way the flame swayed but never broke, the way the wax softened near the wick, becoming golden pools before hardening again. Each drip marked time more tenderly than a bell. When he closed his eyes, he imagined he could hear it, a faint ticking, a whisper of melted moments. The air was heavy with the scent of resin and ash. The candle gave no heat, but it offered light enough to see the lines. In his palm, the shimmer of copper on a nearby dish, the glint of a forgotten key resting beside a quill. The candle did not ask anything. It only stayed, a quiet companion to thoughts that didn't need speaking, a flame for a night that did not demand action. Eventually, the alchemist stood. He walked to the edge of his chamber, where the window opened to the garden. Cool night air drifted in, scented with damp soil and rosemary. He let it wrap around him like a shawl. Behind him, the candle kept burning. It did not hurry. It did not dim. It simply held its space as the alchemist breathed slowly and let his shoulders sink. There would be more questions tomorrow, more tinctures to measure, more scrolls to study. But tonight there was only the quiet of beeswax and stone, and the small, steady gift of stillness. The garden outside the alchemist's chamber lay in a hush, brushed by the cool silver of moonlight. He stepped through the low-arched doorway, feeling the worn stone beneath his feet, and followed the narrow path that wound between sleeping herbs. Everything here had been planted by hand: lemon balm for calm, chamomile for sleep, rue for clarity of thought. The moonlight gave them all a pale shimmer, like frost, though the night was warm. The air was rich with the scent of earth and mint. Each breath felt like a sip from a quiet stream. He reached the little bench beneath the fig tree. Its roots had pushed through the cloister foundation decades ago, but no one had the heart to remove it. Its leaves made soft rustling sounds above him, stirred by a breeze too gentle to feel. He sat, letting the cool settle into his robes. Across the garden wall, a lizard blinked in slow time. Far overhead, stars blinked too, their light older than the monastery, older than the books in the scriptorium, older than any flame he'd ever lit. He folded his hands and looked out over the herbs. The valerian had flowered. Its white blossoms bobbed like tiny lanterns. Nearby, the rosemary bush had grown wild, leaning heavily over the path. The monks used to trim it carefully, but now it was free to sprawl, and he liked it better that way. A bee had fallen asleep on its stem, legs tucked, unmoving. Everything slept in its own way. A stillness of the garden, a stillness of the stars, a stillness of the alchemist's mind, as he sat in the company of leaves and sky. Sometimes he believed silence was its own kind of knowledge. It didn't come from books, that it came from listening to things that did not speak in words. The turning of a fig leaf, the patient sway of lavender, the soft, secret hum of sap rising through stalks in the dark. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift. Not every answer needed to be found. Some things were meant to be felt, like the weight of night on one's shoulders, or the scent of time in warm soil. This was the alchemy he trusted most, the quiet kind. The kind that required no fire, only breath, only stillness, only the garden beneath the moon. Back inside. The alchemist moved through the stone hallways with slow and deliberate steps. The oil lamp in his hand cast a gentle flicker along the walls, lighting old frescoes painted centuries before. One showed the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air, each held in the hands of a robed figure. Another showed an hourglass with sand suspended in mid, a symbol of time held still. He paused in front of it, tilting his head. He had always loved this image, not because it spoke of control, but because it whispered of surrender. What would it feel like, he wondered, if time did not slip away at all, if each moment could be held like dew in the palm? He traced the edge of the painting with a finger, careful not to disturb the fading pigment. Then he continued down the corridor, the scent of beeswax and old stone surrounding him like a soft shawl. At the end of the hall he entered the chamber of Timekeeping. It was small, with no windows. A single narrow shelf ran along the wall, lined with sandglasses of every size, some no taller than a thumb, others nearly a foot high. Each was filled with grains of sand, colored in soft hues: rose, deep ochre, sea glass green. They were all motionless, stopped at various stages, some nearly full at the bottom, others barely begun, but none of them were broken. They had simply been paused. He had learned to stop them with a gesture and a whisper, an art he had refined over years, until even the sand seemed to listen. He lit a candle in the corner, its flame steady and small. Then he turned one of the hourglasses upright and watched as the sand began to fall again, soft, steady, 1 grain at a time. It made no sound, but in the quiet chamber it felt like a rhythm, a heartbeat, made of earth and patience. He sat beside it and breathed in the moment. No rush, no chasing, only the simplicity of now. Many believed that time was an arrow, always moving forward, never waiting. But the alchemist believed differently. He believed time was like water. It could pool, it could slow, it could slow, it could wait in the hollows of a thought or the curve of a breath. He had spent decades studying it, not to master it, but to understand how to be with it. And tonight, in the hush of the chamber, with sand falling soft and slow beside him, he felt that he was. He reached for his journal, its cover worn and smooth from years of use, with a quill and a small inkwell. He began to write, not formulas, not discoveries, just a few lines, a record of how the candle flame leaned gently to one side, how the sand shimmered in its descent, how silence, when deep enough, had its own language. In the quiet hours just before dawn, the alchemist stepped into the small walled garden behind the workshop. The air was cool, with a faint trace of lavender and crushed mint rising from the ground. Dew clung to every leaf and blade, catching the moonlight like strands of silver thread. The garden was not tidy. It was soft with moss, overgrown with thyme, violets, and sleepy chamomile. A narrow path of riverstones wound between the beds, worn smooth by years of slow footsteps. This was where he came when his mind felt full and bright with too many thoughts. Here, time softened like butter left in the sun. He crouched beside a patch of blue borage and touched its star-shaped blossoms with the tip of one finger. These were old healing herbs, used since the time of monks and plague physicians. Borage for courage, chamomile for calm. He whispered their names, as though greeting old friends. The alchemist walked farther in, toward the back wall where the soil was thick with loam and fallen leaves. Here, beneath a tangle of vines, sat a small wooden chest. He lifted the lid gently. Inside were pouches of seeds, some wrapped in parchment, others in linen cloth tied with faded string. He had gathered them over many years, some from distant markets, some traded with herbalists, some gifted by traveling friars and scholars. He picked up a small cloth bundle and opened it. Inside were fennel seeds, tiny and curved, like commas. Fennel had once been grown in monastery gardens across Europe, thought to ward off evil spirits. He let a few fall into his palm and then tucked them back inside. This garden, he believed, held memory not just of plants, but of seasons past, of silent winters and buzzing summers, of the footfalls of friends who are now gone, whose hands had once tended these same roots. He moved to a patch of empty earth and pressed 2 seeds into the soil, not for harvest, not even to grow, but as a quiet act of presence, a way of saying, I am here. Now, in this moment, the sky above him was shifting. The stars faded behind a veil of blue, and the first pink edges of dawn began to glow at the horizon. The alchemist closed his eyes. He listened to the sound of a distant owl, just returning to its roost, the faint rustle of leaves as a breeze stirred the ivy. And beneath it all, the quiet thrum of life continuing, slow and undimmed. He stayed a while longer, kneeling in the soft earth, wrapped in the hush of the garden, and when he stood to leave, his footsteps were lighter, his heart steady. The hours ahead would be slow and thoughtful, and he would welcome each one as if it were a friend. The first light of morning stretched long and golden across the cloister stones. It touched the tops of the arches and spilled gently into the alchemist's workshop, warming the tiled floor where his slippers rested. He had returned from the garden slowly, walking with quiet steps, carrying nothing but the scent of mint and the memory of soft soil on his fingertips. Inside, the world was still and undisturbed. The air held that curious balance between night and day, where shadows linger but light begins to bloom. Above the monastery roof, a single bronze bell began to chime. Low, measured, deep. It rang 5 times. Each tone echoed through the stone corridors, then faded like a breath into silence. The alchemist paused by the window, closing his eyes with the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each ring marked a new hour of devotion, not just for prayer, but for presence, for being in tune with the unfolding of time. In his mind, the bell had always sounded like the earth itself, calling gently to be noticed. Too slow. To listen. To become aware again. He poured a basin of warm water and dipped his hands into it. The water was scented with rose petals and a sprig of rosemary. Left to steep overnight, as he washed he murmured old words, not spells, not charms, just the names of elements: mercury, salt, sulfur, each one spoken with reverence. These were the 3 principles of transformation in the alchemical tradition. They were not merely substances, but symbols of body, soul, and spirit. He dried his hands on a linen cloth, then moved to the table by the hearth. A fresh candle waited to be lit, its wax smooth and unmarked. He struck flint against iron, coaxing a spark into the waiting wick. The flame caught with a soft hiss, flickered, then steadied. Light filled the room, but it was a gentle light fitting for a new hour, not harsh or hurried. The alchemist sat down and opened a small leather-bound book. Its pages were covered in looping script and faded sketches. Some diagrams showed planets, others listed herbs, others recorded dreams. This was his book of ours, not a grimoire, nor a journal, but something in between, placed to record observations that could not be measured with timepieces, like the way rosemary bent in the wind during autumn, or how bees seemed to hum more slowly in the hour after rain. He dipped his quill into a pot of walnut ink and wrote, in small patient letters, 5th hour, garden quiet, stars fading, rosewater on hands, heart steady. The ink dried quickly in the morning warmth. He closed the book. Outside, a sparrow called Dot. Inside, the candle burned low and golden, its light swaying like breath. He was ready for whatever quiet work the morning would offer, for in this hour, nothing rushed. Nothing needed to be solved, only observed, only felt, only lived, one breath at a time. Later that morning, the alchemist opened a drawer lined with velvet and carefully removed a bundle wrapped in deep blue cloth. Inside lay a parchment told, crinkled at the edges, but still holding the faded vibrancy of hand-mixed dyes. It was a map, but not of cities, mountains, or stars. It was a map of forgotten smells, drawn over many slow years. This parchment had become a quiet record of the monastery's secret fragrances. That at the corner of the map, soft lines traced the shape of the herb garden, with notes like lavender, in midsummer faintest scent at dawn, and time's strongest when crushed underfoot in late August. The bakery's corner was marked with a golden smudge labeled first bread of morning. By the stables, a faint grey patch read sweet hay. After frost. And near the alchemist's own chamber rose water steam. Late winter, 4th hour, each smell had its season, its moment, its soul, and each one had been drawn, not in haste, but in quiet devotion. He breathed deeply as he traced a finger over a pale green circle juniper smoke. On feast days, that smell lived in memory as much as it did in the air. He remembered how it curled up from censers in the chapel, mixing with beeswax and old stone. It was the smell of sacred silence. The alchemist turned the map gently and touched a blank corner. There was still space to record more. He closed his eyes and listened. A hint of pear blossom drifted in from the orchard. Somewhere in the distance, firewood was being split, and beneath it all the faintest trace of beeswax polish warming on the sunlit floor. He dipped his quill and added a new note. 17th day of planting moonpear, bloom and morning, wood smoke. The moment was captured not in sound or sight but in scent, a detail most would never think to hold on to. But the alchemist knew that memory lived best in the quietest corners. He folded the map again, wrapped it in cloth, and returned it to its place. No lock guarded it, no label marked it, only the hush of the room around it, and the tender hush within. In the corner of the alchemist's chamber stood something most visitors never noticed. It wasn't a sundial, it wasn't a candle-clock, it was a clock of light, not with ticking hands or swinging weights, but with carefully placed panes of colored glass, arranged to catch the morning sun. At first light, a pale golden beam would touch the easternmost square fragment of amber that glowed like a drop of warm honey. By mid-morning light crept toward the center, where a circle of green glass painted the stone with soft mossy hues. By afternoon, a line of deep blue caught the western light and cast the color of river water on the far wall. No bells rang. No gears turned. Only the quiet drift of sun across colored glass. That it was a clock meant only for watching, not measuring, not hurrying, just witnessing the slow sweep of time as it passed like silk over stone. The alchemist watched this silent clock as he sipped warm tea from a carved wooden cup. The flavor of dried mint and chamomile filled his senses. He had once tried to measure time in more precise ways, sands and strings, gears and pulleys, but they all seemed too eager, too sharp. This was better. A clock that didn't care if you watched it. A clock that kept no count, only color. He remembered how the idea had come to him. Long ago, walking through the cathedral near the coast, he had watched how the stained glass windows turned the dust into floating gems, red and violet, turquoise and gold. He'd stood in that glow for nearly an hour, unmoving, breathing in the hush of light and shadow. Now, here in his own quiet chamber, he had recreated that feeling, a hush that changed shape as the day moved, a reminder that time was not a thing to trap, it was a current to float within. He watched as the amber pane began to dim. The green square glowed faintly now. It was nearly midday. But nothing rushed, not the air. Not the heart, not the hours. When the day grew too warm, the alchemist would retreat to the shaded corner of his chamber, where a deep copper bowl sat on a wooden table. He called it the Bowl of Stars. By day, it was filled with water drawn from the cool spring beneath the cloister, perfectly still and dark. By night, it became a mirror for the heavens. The first time he noticed its power. He had left a window open. Moonlight crept in, starlight followed, and as the wind softened and the night grew hushed, the surface of the bowl shimmered. Stars twinkled in it, gently dancing in the water's quiet. He had sat beside it for hours, his head resting on folded arms, watching constellations move across the surface as the earth turned silently. There was no need to chart them. No parchment, no ink, only watching. Only being. Each night, the reflections were different. Some nights, the moon painted silver ripples across the bowl. Other nights, clouds made the stars flicker, like breath passing over glass. Sometimes, he would drop in a single petal of dried violet. It would float there. UNMOVING. The reflection of a star would land on the petal's surface, as if it had traveled countless miles just to rest a moment. He believed the bowl held more than just light. It held memory. A memory of quiet hours, of dreams unspoken, of time so still. Even the dust in the air seemed to pause. He kept it on the same table, in the same place. Year after year. Never changed. The bowl. Never changed the water. And yet, it was never the same. It taught him that reflection was not about seeing the past. It was about noticing the present. As it is, and as it slips gently into the next breath. The alchemist kept bundles of dried lavender hanging from the rafters. Each bundle was tied with faded blue ribbon, frayed at the ends, looped with care, then forgotten for seasons at a time. The scent never vanished, it only deepened. When the windows were cracked open to let in evening air, the breeze would stir the lavender. It would brush softly against itself, rustling like whispers of old cloth. And with it came a scent both sweet and aged, lavender and dust. He often said those two smells were the scent of memory. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would pass under the bundles without looking up, letting the faint perfume settle into his robe, into his hair, into the folds of parchment he carried under his arm. Visitors would sometimes notice. They would pause and smile gently, and he would offer no explanation. In the warmth of early summer, when the sun lingered just a little longer over the walls of the cloister, the scent would grow stronger. It curled around the brass instruments on his workbench. It slipped between the pages of his weathered books. It even clung to the stone walls, so that if you leaned close enough, you could smell the years. Once, a young apprentice asked if he should dust the rafters. The alchemist only smiled. He said the dust up there was older than either of them. It had listened to dreams, it had watched stars, and most of all, it had waited for silence, waited for time to slow, waited for the soft turning of seasons. It wasn't clutter, he said, it was stillness, made visible. Tucked beneath the northern arch of the cloister was something few noticed. It looked like a fountain, but there was no water. Instead, there was a bowl of polished bronze. Above it, a narrow spout released a single drop at a time. Each drop fell with a quiet, steady rhythm, one every 30 seconds. The alchemist called it the rain clock. It wasn't built to tell time in hours. It was meant to count the softness of things. He believed that time, when slowed down enough, became like water. Dripping. Pooling. Disappearing. And so, the rain clock was allowed to drip, undisturbed, day and night. The bowl beneath it never overflowed. Instead, a tiny groove along its edge carried the water down into the earth. Under the floor. Through stone channels. Into the hidden garden beyond. Some days, the alchemist would sit beside it with his eyes closed, listening. Each drop a small heartbeat, each pause a space to breathe. It calmed him more than any chant, any bell, any flame. He told his apprentices that monks of the past once kept time not just with bells but with candles, sand, and water. They believed that the slow passage of time could purify the soul, that silence, stretched between drips, was a kind of prayer. And so he listened, and waited, letting the sound of dripping water draw him inward, to quiet places, to deep places, to the stillness that all alchemists must know before they can truly begin. Free from ellipses or M-dashes, perfect for AI voiceover. Part 23. The hidden door in the wall at the far end of the alchemist's workshop. There was a stone wall with no markings. It looked like all the others, plain, solid, unremarkable. But every seventh night, after the moon had risen and the halls had fallen silent, he walked toward that wall with a single beeswax candle in hand. He would set the candle down, right at the base, where the stone met the floor. Then he waited. Just long enough for the flame to flicker against the stones. That flicker, faint and golden, revealed a tiny seam, the outline of a door, invisible by daylight. Only firelight could find it. He pressed his palm against the seam, and with a quiet, steady breath, leaned forward. There was no latch. No hinge. Only pressure and patience. Then, with a deep, slow sound like ancient wood settling, the door eased open. Behind it lay a small chamber, no larger than a garden shed. Inside, the air was cooler, still, dusty with memory. There were shelves of scrolls, vessels sealed with wax, tiny tools made of bone and copper, and a book with no title, wrapped in red cloth. The alchemist always lit a second candle before unwrapping the book. He treated it the way a monk might treat a relic, with quiet hands and bowed head. The pages were brittle, stained by centuries. Written in ink, the color of dusk, symbols he had spent half a lifetime learning to read. Not magic, not spells, but formulas of balance, of harmony, of the secret rhythm between heat, metal, breath, and belief. This was the place he visited when the outside world felt too loud, when he needed silence. And time, and truth. In the hidden chamber, tucked beside the red-wrapped book, sat a strange device. It looked like a clock, but it had no hands, no ticking, only a flat, dark disk of polished brass, surrounded by concentric circles. Each circle bore ancient markings, lines, that curved like vines. Symbols that changed with the angle of the candlelight. It was the alchemist's shadow clock, not made to tell hours, but to measure the length and softness of shadows cast at twilight. He would light a small taper and place it at the center. Then he would sit, cross-legged before it, still quiet, watching the shadows stretch outward in delicate rings as they reached each mark. He noted the moment with a stroke of ink, not for records, not for study, but as a ritual of slowing down, of watching light fall and fade, like breath in a sleeping child. The monks in the monastery once said that the shadow clock was built by a hermit who lived in a cave and measured peace in hours of stillness. They believed that when the last ring was reached, the heart could rest more easily that night. The alchemist watched the final shadow brush the edge of the outermost circle. He closed his eyes, took a deep, steady breath, and whispered a soft phrase in Latin, one meant to honor the quiet. In that silence, the chamber felt warm and heavy, like a wool cloak wrapped around a soul. He rose, wrapped the book once more, and gently sealed the door behind him. The stone vanished into the wall. Only the fading scent of beeswax remained. He returned to his study, where the brass instruments gleamed, and the distilling vessels hummed their slow, watery rhythm above him. The moon floated beyond the high arched window, silent, steady, watching all things pass with soft, silver light. And within the hush of those old stone walls, the alchemist sat down beside his glass table and began preparing a new tincture, one drop at a time, each movement slow and steady, each breath deep and even. He was not chasing gold anymore. He was chasing time itself, not to capture it, but to feel it passing with full presence. The alchemist's hand hovered over a vial of rose-colored liquid. He poured a single drop into a shallow brass dish, watching as the color spread like a petal unfolding in water. This tincture was different, not meant to cure illness or clear the lungs. It was for remembering, crafted from dried elderflowers, honeycomb wax, and a single shard of lavender resin, harvested at dawn during a quiet summer. He called it the tincture of days. When warmed gently by candle flame, it released a scent like warm linen and sunlit meadows. Old memories stirred, not sharp or exact, but gentle impressions, like the echo of footsteps in a long hallway. He leaned in to breathe the warmth of it, and with each breath, something softened inside him. He saw a window with blue shutters, a garden wall covered in ivy, a woman's hands holding a sprig of thyme. The past did not return with clarity. It arrived like music drifting through stone, the warmth of a time long gone, resting quietly in his chest. He did not speak. He did not write anything down. Instead, he turned the flame lower beneath the brass dish, letting the scent fill the room like a slow tide, and then, slowly, he returned the tincture to its velvet-lined case. One memory was enough. He closed the lid and placed both hands flat on the work table, still, listening. The monastery had gone quiet for the night. Even the bells in the wind tower had stilled. Only the faint dripping of water echoed in the corners of the stone room, a rhythm that matched his breath. He let himself rest there, not asleep, not awake, simply present, wrapped in the comfort of slow hours, and soft lights, and the gentle reminder that some things need not be remembered with the mind, only with the here asterisk on a shelf no wider than a handspan. Beside the old celestial charts rested a parchment scroll tied with twine. The alchemist untied it slowly. Inside was a recipe written in looping, faded ink, the ink of the moonflower. It read. It was not ordinary ink. It could only be read by moonlight. Made from the nectar of a rare flower that opened only once each season, under a full moon, and closed before dawn. The flower grew wild along the edge of the monastery's herb garden, unnoticed by most, but the alchemist had watched it. For years he knew when it would bloom. He had already collected its dew. Each droplet had been kept in a silver vial wrapped in wool to preserve the chill of the night. The ink was mixed with powdered glass and the softened soot of a candle that had been burned during vespers. A tiny spoonful, no more. He stirred it gently in a shallow bowl, using a goose feather to swirl it into a silvery sheen. Tonight, he would write not for others, only for himself. A note to the hours, to time, to the silence between breaths. He dipped the quill and let it rest above the parchment. Then he began, not with words, but with symbols, curves, stars, circles, that looked like ripples in water, a language that no longer existed, a script used by stargazers, long before monks measured hours by candle. The ink shimmered softly, nearly invisible in the candlelight, but he knew, come midnight, it would glow like frost on stone, and when the moon rose high and clear, he would hold the parchment to its light, and remember, not what he had written, but what it meant to create something beautiful in silence. He set the parchment aside to dry, and folded his hands, a breath in, a breath out. The night waited, gently. As he did too. The fire in the hearth had long since quieted, leaving only the soft whisper of embers nestled in the ash. The air inside the stone laboratory held a hush so complete it felt like velvet drawn over the ears. Brother Ans sat in his usual place, cross-legged on the thick woolen mat near the southern window, the folds of his robe pooling around him like water. The hourglass had turned once more. Another portion of sand trickled down, silent and sure. Tonight, the alchemist did not reach for his scrolls. He did not adjust the copper alembics or tend to the sleepy glow of the fire beneath his glass vessels. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the tiny spiral shell resting on the windowsill. It had arrived weeks ago, nestled inside a pouch of dried lavender sent from a fellow monk who lived in a cloister near the coast. It was no larger than his thumbnail. It spiraled perfect, the color soft as moonlight. To Anselm, it was the universe. In miniature, he studied the shell's curves with reverence, feeling something ancient settle in his chest. In the Middle Ages, monks believed that the geometry of a spiral echoed divine perfection, a symbol of how the world repeated itself in widening circles, always returning, always deepening. Anselm had once read that even the great cathedrals were built with these forms in mind, their arches, their towers, their sanctuaries, all spiraling toward heaven. Outside the window, the wind moved softly across the meadow. The tall grasses bent and whispered. A pair of barn owls called to each other from opposite ends of the garden wall. Their sounds fell into the hush of the hour, long and low and beautiful. Brother Anselm closed his eyes. He remembered a time when he was a boy, long before he ever dreamed of alchemy. His father had taken him into the woods during a heavy snow. They had walked in silence beneath the fir trees, each branch crowned in white. That night, Anselm had learned that silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. Now, all these years later, he returned to that silence. Inside, his body, his heartbeats slowed. His breath became gentle and full. He listened to the air moving between the stone walls, the faint crackle of a settling beam, the quiet music of nightbirds and insects beyond the window's edge. He did not need gold tonight. He did not need answers. He needed stillness. In the alchemical scrolls he had spent a lifetime copying and studying. There was one phrase he had circled over and over again: solve et coagula, dissolve and bind. The essence of transformation. It was not only the metals that were asked to become more than they were. The alchemist, too, had to surrender and rebuild. And so, he breathed. He allowed the silence to dissolve him. Moments passed, or perhaps hours. Time no longer measured itself by bells or candles. It moved like wind across a still pond, nearly imperceptible. Even the flame in the oil lamp beside him seemed to sway more slowly, its golden glow deepening to amber. Then, from the darkness, came the faintest sound, a tapping, rhythmic and light. Anselm opened his eyes and turned toward the chamber door. There stood a young apprentice, cloaked in wool, a journal tucked under his arm. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder, though he said nothing. Anselm nodded gently, motioning him in with a simple hand. The boy stepped inside, removed his sandals, and settled onto the floor across from the alchemist. For a long while, they said nothing. Words would only have disturbed the quiet they both recognized. Instead, the boy placed the journal between them and opened it. Inside were drawings, hundreds of them, spirals, vessels, leaves and shells, and the moon in its different shapes. It was not theory, it was observation. It was attention made visible. Anselm felt something warm stir in his chest. Without speaking, he reached into the folds of his robe and withdrew a small object wrapped in linen. He placed it before the boy and nodded once. The boy unwrapped it with care, revealing a small brass compass, worn but precise, its needle steady even in the still air. The alchemist had used it for years. Now, it belonged to the next hands. They watched the needle point north. Outside, the wind turned, brushing across the orchard with a sleepy rustle. The stars overhead glimmered like pinpricks through velvet. Time did not march. It did not tick. It opened slowly like a flower and settled like snow. And within the chamber, the old alchemist and the new sat together in that most sacred of hours, the slow hour, where nothing need be changed, because everything was already enough. The vessel slept, the embers glowed, and the spiral shell kept its quiet watch upon the sill. Asterisk. The boy's hands cupped the brass compass gently, as if he feared it might vanish like breath on glass. Brother Anselm smiled, not with his lips, but with the soft crease around his eyes, the kind of smile that grows from deep within, like ivy winding up an ancient wall. He remembered when he had first received the compass. It had been given to him by a master who now lay buried beneath the rose hedge in the southern garden. That day had smelled of iron and sage, and the elder monk had spoken only one sentence: learn to follow stillness as if it were a star. Now, that same sentence passed silently between him and the boy, as clearly as if it had been written in flame across the stones. Anselm leaned forward slightly, motioning toward the drawings in the boy's journal. He gestured for him to turn the pages. Slowly, the boy flipped through images both careful and wild, sketches of frost on windows, curls of smoke rising from a brazier, the way light split through a prism and touched every color without asking for praise. Each image carried a softness, an attention to the quiet geometry of the world. The boy was not merely drawing what he saw, he was drawing what he listened to. Anselm saw himself in that listening. He stood slowly and crossed the room to one of the oak cabinets near the furnace. His knees creaked faintly as he knelt and unlatched the lower door. Inside, wrapped in heavy cloth, were several old scrolls sealed with wax. These were not copied texts from other monks. These were his own writings, years of reflection, refinement, failure, and slow discovery. He removed one, the thinnest of the lot, tied in twine, and carried it over to the boy. The boy's eyes grew round. This was not just parchment, it was permission. The scroll unrolled with a soft crackle, revealing delicate script and faded diagrams. On the first page, written in a careful hand, was a simple heading: what the flame does not teach, the ash will. Anselm sat beside the boy and traced the first few lines with a fingertip. He whispered, "This one is yours now. Read it when you can't sleep, or when the fire speaks louder than the bell, or when the wind reminds you of your name." The boy nodded, cradling the scroll as if it were a lantern. They sat in stillness again. Outside, dawn had begun to stir behind the trees. The sky turned the faintest shade of pewter, like the surface of a blade not yet polished. The birds had not yet begun their songs, but the world held its breath in that brief hush before morning. Brother Anselm stood, bones slow but steady, and walked toward the brazier. He added a small piece of apple wood, watching it catch with a bright flicker. The flames rose and curled, orange turning to gold. He murmured a line of prayer, not spoken aloud, but shaped in the breath. Then he turned to the shelves that held his oldest glassware, beakers with thick bottoms, flasks stained with time, tubes twisted like ivy vines. He selected one narrow-necked and dusted with rose ash, and set it before the boy. "Today," he said softly, "you will learn to distill breath." The boy looked confused for a moment, then curious. Anselm smiled again. "Not air," he whispered, "breath, the moment between thought and silence. We will capture it with patience. We will not rush." He lit the small flame beneath the flask, adjusted the copper coil, and handed the boy a feather quill. "Write what you feel, not what you know." And so began their lesson, not of formulas, but of rhythm. As the sun lifted just enough to graze the upper wall of the cloister with gold, the apprentice leaned in and watched the first drop of vapor condense in the glass. It fell like a tear from a sleeping face. It was perfect, and it was enough. The droplet slid down the neck of the glass flask, catching the morning light like a star cradled in water. It landed with the faintest sound, barely more than a sigh, and gathered with the others, forming a shimmering pool no wider than a fingernail. Brother Anselm observed in silence, his hands folded behind his back. The apprentice sat forward, gaze fixed, breath shallow, as if exhaling might disturb the delicate rhythm of the distillation. And in truth, it could. Alchemy, for all its reputation of fire and force, was often more about restraint than reaction. Outside, the wind traced patterns through the cloister garden. It stirred the branches of the fig tree near the stone well, making its wide leaves tremble like the pages of an open book. A pair of sparrows darted past the high window, wings flashing in the golden light, and far off, the first bell rang low and heavy, calling the monastery to its early prayers. But in the alchemy room, time moved differently. Anselm reached for a leather-bound volume. His master's journal and opened it to a worn page where ink had long since faded to the color of smoke. He held it open for the boy. "There," he said gently, "read that aloud." The boy cleared his throat, his voice soft and uncertain. "The soul does not boil, it simmers." Anselm nodded again. "The soul does not boil, it simmers." Again. The boy's voice grew steadier. "The soul does not boil, it simmers." With each repetition, the words settled deeper, not just in his mind, but into the rhythm of the room itself. The flame crackled, the droplets fell, the air hung still and fragrant with herbs. Alchemy, Anselm said, is not the making of gold, it is the slowing of time until truth becomes visible. He moved to a high shelf and brought down a small vial filled with dried petals, lavender and linden blossom, and sprinkled a few into a stone bowl. With a wooden pestle, he ground them until the scent rose like memory, faint and familiar. "Smell teaches too," he said. "The body remembers what the mind forgets." The boy leaned in, eyes half closed, and inhaled. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They worked in silence for another hour, preparing infusions, measuring oils, sketching delicate diagrams into parchment. Anselm guided only with gestures, now a tilt of the hand, a pointed finger, a lifted brow. The boy moved slowly, his focus deep and unbroken, as if nothing existed beyond this room, this moment. Finally, when the shadows shifted and the light turned more golden than white, Anselm extinguished the flame. The glass still held its slow endescence, a pale liquid, nearly clear, with just the faintest shimmer of gold at its edge. He held it up. "Do you see it?" The boy nodded. "What do you see?" "I see light, and breath, and stillness." Anselm smiled. "Good. That is the first success. The rest will take years." He placed the glass in a padded wooden case, closed the lid, and turned the key. Then he reached for the bell pull and gave it a soft tug. Somewhere above, in the hallway, a small bell chimed, one no one else would hear but the kitchen boy who'd brought their evening bread. "We've done enough," Anselm said. "Let the rest settle on its own." They stepped out into the cloister just as the last warmth of afternoon brushed the stone. The air smelled of rosemary, and from the far end of the garden, a dove cooed low and slow. The boy looked up at the sky, quiet, endless, and for the first time, Anselm noticed how his shoulders had dropped, how his brow no longer furrowed, how he walked not quickly, but with presence. Yes, the work had begun. Night returned slowly over the cloister, like a velvet curtain drawn with care. The last edge of daylight faded from the stone columns as the bells signaled Compline, the final prayer of the day. Brother Anselm and the boy knelt in the back row of the chapel, their hoods drawn low, their breathing calm and steady. The chanting of the monks rose and fell like a tide, even and unhurried. But in the boy's mind, the day still glowed. He could see the soft gold of the vial, the curve of the flask, the perfect moment. The droplet had fallen into the silence. When the final amen faded into stillness, the boy followed Anselm through the dark corridor lit only by candle sconces. They walked in silence, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of meaning, of patience, of a lesson still unfolding. At the alchemy door, Anselm paused and placed a hand flat against the wood. "What we do inside this room," he said softly, "is not just craft, it's devotion." He pushed the door open slowly. The room had changed. The flame was gone, but the warmth remained, like breath still lingering after a whispered word. The scent of lavender still hung in the air, mingled now with beeswax and a subtle touch of iron. Boy stood near the workbench, watching Anselm open the wooden case once more. The vial inside shimmered gently, catching the low light of the single lantern they had lit. "We won't touch it tonight," Anselm said. "It must settle, like thought, like longing, like faith." The boy nodded. Anselm turned toward a shelf, lined with objects, some familiar, others obscure. A withered rose encased in glass, a bell made from folded silver, a map that showed no place but marked only seasons. He picked up a small hourglass with purple sand and handed it to the boy. "Do you know how to listen to time?" he asked. The boy turned it over. The sand began its slow descent. "Not count it," Anselm added. "Not chase it, just listen." They sat beside the window. Outside, the cloister garden was bathed in silver moonlight. Crickets sang in the distant hedges. The stone walls held the day's warmth like a secret. The boy spoke after a long pause. "Master, when will I be ready?" Anselm didn't answer right away. He watched the hourglass. "When you stop asking," he said. The boy nodded slowly, his thumb running along the wood frame of the glass. The sand inside didn't rush, it didn't stall, it simply fell, one grain after another, silent and sure. That night, sleep came not in a sudden drop, but like the settling of dust in still air. The boy slept in the alcove beside the lab, wrapped in a linen blanket that smelled faintly of dried herbs and candlesoot. And the alchemist, seated by the window, watched the stars appear one by one, each one a flare of something ancient, distant, and patient. It was not the end of the day, it was its transformation. Morning returned with quiet grace. The first light crept over the stone ledges like a blessing, slow and golden, brushing the wooden table where the vials rested in stillness. The cloister stirred gently, no bells yet, no footsteps echoing through the halls, just the whisper of wind through the high, narrow windows. The boy awoke before the sound of prayer, his eyes opening not with haste but with a calm alertness that had grown over these weeks. He sat up slowly, stretching beneath the linen, listening. There was no rush, no fear of being late, only the presence of time as something to dwell in, not escape. He rose and padded barefoot across the stone to where Anselm sat at the window, already awake, already watching the world unfold. "You slept well," the alchemist said softly. "I listened to the dark," the boy replied. Anselm smiled faintly. "Then you heard the world without words." They lit the morning lamp together, the boy carefully striking flint to steel until the spark caught. Anselm nodded at his steadiness. No wasted motion, no panic, just the patient repetition of effort until the flame was born. Breakfast was simple: bread, a bit of soft cheese, and a clay cup of warm herb water. They sat by the bench as they ate, watching the light shift across the copper instruments. When the meal was done, Anselm opened a small wooden drawer and pulled out a parchment bound with red thread. "Today," he said, "we attempt the rendering of soul essence." The boy's eyes lit with interest. "It requires no fire," Anselm continued, "only glass, oil, stillness, and your breath." He laid out the tools with slow precision: a glass spiral chamber, a copper loop, a small dish of gold-colored petals, calendula gathered under the solstice sun. The boy leaned in. "Every movement we make," said Anselm, "must match the rhythm of the breath." He demonstrated taking in a slow inhale as he turned the loop, exhaling as he pressed it into the oil, his hands never jerking or halting. The boy mirrored him, hands trembling only slightly as he followed. The petals, once crushed, released their deep scent into the chamber. The oil turned golden, then nearly clear, save for a single, floating thread that shimmered like spun sunlight. They watched it hover, neither sinking nor rising. "See," Anselm whispered, "balance." For hours they did not speak. They worked, moved, breathed. The world outside faded into the low hum of bees and the sway of ivy in the courtyard. Birds came and went on the windowsill. Time unfolded like silk. Evening neared. Anselm placed the completed soul essence into a wax-sealed jar. "It is not gold," he said, "but it holds the warmth of the sun." The boy stared at the vial. "I don't want gold," he said. "I want to learn how to wait." "Like that?" Anselm turned, studying the boy. "Then you are already richer than most kings." They cleaned the table as the sun dipped beyond the walls. Lanterns were lit. The old bell rang softly through the stone. And once more, the slow hour began. Night fell like a hush over the cloister. Candles flickered low, casting long shadows across the stone walls and shelves where glass bottles caught their light like tiny stars. Outside the narrow windows, the wind stirred gently through the lavender bushes, their scent drifting inward with each passing breeze. Anselm stood at the tall work table, his hands resting on the smooth grain of the wood. The boy stood beside him, not as a student tonight, but as something closer, a companion who had walked the long, quiet hours of learning and emerged changed. The final experiment of the season had been completed. The soul essence was safely sealed. The notes had been written in careful ink. The alchemical circle had been dusted clean, and the chamber swept of ashdot. There was no more work, only the quiet. Anselm turned to the boy, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "You've walked with me through every hour," he said. "You've waited through silence, through failure, through the stillness between." The boy nodded. "I thought I would become something else," he whispered. "But now, I think, I've just become more myself." The alchemist's face softened. "That is the finest transformation of all." They sat by the hearth, the old stones warm against their backs. The fire was low, but steady. No words passed between them now. There was no need. The silence was whole, like the silence after a bell stops ringing. In that final hour, the boy leaned his head back and looked up at the arching ceiling, where time seemed to vanish into darkness. He thought of the ticking that once haunted him, of clocks and calendars and the urgency of the world outside these walls. But here, in this quiet room, time had unfolded slowly, like the petals of a late blooming flower. He closed his eyes. The fire cracked softly. Glass settled with a faint clink. Somewhere far off, an owl called, and the world, in all its complexity and clamor, faded away into the hush of peace, the rhythm of breath, and the slow hour that had taught him to see everything differently. Here, under the watchful gaze of stars, the alchemist and his student sat still, and the story came to rest.